The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this Functional Aging Institute webinar. This is Dr. Cody Sipe, and really glad all of you could join us today. We've got a lot going on at FAI these days, and trying to stay busy, getting good information out to you guys through these webinars. And, one of the things that Dan and I feel like we need to spend time with and spend time doing is looking at new tools, new resources that are out there and kind of vetting those, kind of thinking about there's a lot of tools out there, some that are more effective than the others, lots of different opinions, but we see kind of something come along that we think is unique and can really provide some value to training and to the functional outcomes that we're trying to get with our clients. And that's something we feel compelled to share with you guys. So we had Chris Severs on here before talking about anchor point training and some of the tools that he has that we really love and we use in our facility. And recently, I say recently, probably in the past year, we've been learning more and more about ActivMotion training. And so I'm really glad to have Derek Mikulski here with us, who is kind of the creator of this new tool, that we have available to us. So Derek, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Cody. Happy to be here.
Good deal. So, tell us a little bit, kind of about yourself and, kind of what has led up to this. I mean, you're a young guy. You're kind of coming out of the gate, pretty early. You're not waiting until you're, mid-40s like I am to get this stuff rolling along. So you're way ahead of the game,
Yeah.
Derek. So that's good stuff. So kind of tell us, how did this all kind of come about as far as an idea and a concept?
Yeah, definitely. No, well, thanks for the introduction. I appreciate that, and I'm really happy to be able to deliver some value to your listeners in the way of education. This is great. So, I guess I'll cover my story briefly for you guys real quick, and then get into some of the education. This concept, active motion training, and our products, the ActivMotion Bars, are very new to our industry. We launched the company at the beginning of last year, of 2014. We've made a whole lot of progress since then, and everything has been accepted very well. But that's the reality. We're a young company. I'll just be transparent. I'm 29 years old. I definitely got started early. I've always had a entrepreneurial spirit. And about 3 years ago, I had this idea for the active motion bars and active motion training. And I always compare my experience to what you see on like Shark Tank. I wasn't on Shark Tank, but I built prototypes in my garage, built a business plan, started to sell active motion bars, and raised funding so that we could really give this a shot nationally and across the world, actually, which is what we're doing now, which is awesome. And here we are today. We work in a lot of different verticals within the fitness market, from with fitness clubs and studios to physical therapists and corrective exercise specialists. This modality that we've developed applies everywhere, but especially to working with our active, older adults, which is what I'm obviously here to talk about today. So.
Yeah, that's great. And just kudos to you for making it happen. And that's something for everybody to really learn and to take note of is, you got to go out and you got to grab it. You got to do it and make it happen and kind of follow your dream. And we have a lot of trainers even that, I'm wondering if I should do something on my own. Go out and kind of, especially kind of plant my flag with this population and really, do a facility or do a program. And you never know till you try. You got to really go after it. So kudos to you and kind of what you're doing. So you have provided Dan and I with some bars to kind of play around with and use, and we really appreciate that. They've been really fun. I've had them out in our research lab here, playing around with them, trying different moves, and I think they're really stellar and really interesting, and like you said, really different. It's something unique. So kind of go ahead and go into some of the the uses of it and some of the education behind it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I definitely have a PowerPoint put together here, so I'll just start to cover everything. fairly quickly and then make sure we leave time for questions and things. But I think before I go into the science and some of the protocols and methods, it's, I want to tell the story just a little bit more as to what active motion training is, what the ActivMotion bars are, why as a fitness professional 3 years ago I saw a need to create them, because the need actually stems from me working with active older adults. So this is just a little bit about what active motion training is here on this slide. I'm not really big into reading this stuff verbatim, so those people following along who want to read word for word all the slides, that's great. I'm just going to highlight the main concepts here. So basically what active motion training is this idea of using what we call an active resistance to bring a unique challenge to the body, something that typically isn't in most fitness routines right now. And the reason why we're trying to bring this unique stimulus of variable resistance is because basically in life there's so many nuances that exist when we're moving and living day to day. Very little of our movement actually exists in fixed positions, lifting static weights. That was one of the main problems that I had with following these protocols that have existed for 30, 40, 50 years. Is everything is multidimensional and variable. So I wanted to take the essence of that and develop it into the system that can help us bring more functional fitness to our clients. And that's basically what active motion training is, and we use the ActivMotion bar to achieve that. So our active motion bars, they vary in weight. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But they're filled, everyone, regardless of the weight, is filled with this active resistance, and it's ball bearings that shift inside the active motion bars. So that's what we've heard. When I say active resistance, that's what I'm saying. It's not static. It's active. That resistance is shifting to create all these different variables, these different resistance vectors, and cause more mind-muscle awareness and muscle activation, which we'll get into in a little bit too. But that's a little bit about the modality and about our products. Now, as I mentioned, 3 years ago I was a trainer at Lifetime Fitness, and I'd say probably 90% of my clients were over the age of 50. And the protocols that have existed up until now around balance basically involved two things: doing movements on a single leg and then doing movements on balance platforms. One of the reasons why I like yours and Dan's system so much Cody, is because you guys really get to the root of balance, which is so much more than just being able to stand on one leg or a platform. I wanted to take the idea of these balance platforms and put it into a form where we could place that same instability in the hands. I worked with a lot of older people who were hesitant to stand on balance platforms, either because they couldn't or because they thought they were going to fall. And considering the fact that most of our movement in day-to-day life doesn't take place on an unstable surface, it takes place on the ground, I thought this would be functionally better for our clients to have them using this variable resistance in their hands instead of standing on a balance platform. Not to talk down to that method at all, because it's still obviously beneficial and useful in any training environment, but I'm just kind of stating why I went through this process of creating the ActivMotion bar. So that was the main inspiration right there, being able to put instability in the hands based around this idea that life is dynamic, not static. Variables exist. There's nuances that are changing all the time. So going along with that, here's just a couple of examples of this variation. Nothing we do is fixed and static, as I said. There's, different masses displaced on our bodies at any given time, depending on what we're doing, what we're lifting, how we're moving. And the active motion bar and active motion training is meant to simulate all these nuances that exist in our day-to-day life to help create stronger, more resilient, and functionally fit bodies. So I have this slide thrown in here to kind of dive into a little bit of the science now and create a rationale, a foundation of rationale based on science that's existed for a while. So I love this slide that we created because it kind of breaks down everything that we do and that we're about in our training method into one concise slide. So on the left-hand side, you'll see some of the systems that are involved and our postural control and our fitness. So we have vision, vestibular system, proprioception, and our skin. So these are all of these systems that sense body position and then send that information to our brain, where information is processed, and then the output is sent back to our muscle tissue to help us move. So on the right-hand side, you can see how that feedback process occurs, from brain receiving the information to sending the motor command to movement taking place, and then back around we go. And a reason why the ActivMotion Bar is so great in training active adults is because we're able to heighten these senses. And as we know, if we can heighten those senses, we're able to bring more mind-muscle awareness to the training environment. So there are things that the ActivMotion Bars and ActivMotion training does that lend themselves really well to training these systems, these feel, hear, and see systems. And so when we start to go over the cues that we use when teaching an exercise to clients, most of those cues are based off of these systems, which is pretty cool, and helping develop better fitness and better mind-muscle connectivity. Cody, I don't know if you want to jump in here and say anything at this point at the science portion here.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, I actually just did a webinar on multisensory training, and looking at the three systems, where you kind of look proprioception, skin, touch, kind of group that in one, called just the overall somatosensory system. And all three are critical, and it's an area that I think is really underutilized by fitness professionals, because a lot of them don't understand it. Don't understand the importance of these three sensory systems. And as we get older, we see declines in all three systems, and so it becomes very important for fall risk, maintaining those as much as possible. And I also kind of also say, when you think about balance, so kind of one of my big approaches of balance, you talked about kind of using those unstable surfaces, and they have their place. But when you think about replication of daily life and kind of what we're required to do, usually the instability that produces a fall is not instability from the ground, right? It's not that we have stepped on a rock in the middle of a river that's wobbling all over the place. Yeah, that might happen when you go hiking, but the way most people fall is the ground's stable. Something else happened above their feet that caused them to fall, that they couldn't respond to. And so that's why I really like the concept of the unstable resistance being in your hands, as you said, to cause, and it's kind of what we call perturbation training. Like if we're going to do perturbation training with somebody, basically we're going to push them, right? I mean, we're going to push them in different directions, and they're going to have to respond to it, and that's kind of what this simulates, right? When you've got those balls that are moving around in that bar as you tilt it, it's creating the instability that's top-down instability, not bottom-up instability. So I really like that approach, because I think it really fits more into a scientific approach to balance training for most people, as far as how people fall. And I'll just kind of throw this in as literally the other day, I had a couple students in my office that were, I was trying to explain some stuff to, and I had the ActivMotion Bar sitting there. So I grabbed the ActivMotion Bar just to have a bar to use, and stupid balls were rolling around inside of it so much. I'm trying to show them something. I'm like, God, it was like holding a little kid in your arms. It was like wiggling around, and it just reinforced, like, oh yeah, I forgot, because I hadn't picked it up in a few days. Oh, I kind of forgot how dynamic it was, to even. I was just trying to do even like a basic arm curl, and the balls were kind of rolling around everywhere. So good stuff for balance control.
Yeah, and you hit it right on the head too. I mean, the whole the science that you mentioned based around the training is exactly why we're doing what we're doing in active motion training, is to bring that unique new stimulus to the environment, because it's just as functionally valid as standing on a balanced platform. So now, just to go real quick, what our goals are through active motion training, and then I'll outline some more science for you, is we do follow a systematic kind of progressive protocol and we'll go through that later, but this is kind of just highlights, the goals that we try to achieve through our training with our active adults. And again, kind of going against what's been taught a lot in terms of balance training is, before we think about balance for an older adult, we try to teach the development of core stability and trunk strength first, because the idea of developing that anchor so that we can efficiently move our extremities is very key. So we focus first on the development of core and joint stability strength, right? Then we'll progress to developing the proprioceptive abilities and body awareness and integrated strength after we do that. Obviously, it's all in an effort to build holistic fitness, and just as much about giving our active agers, our clients, confidence so that to move efficiently, to be independent, to live happily and pain-free. So let's just go through the goals there a little bit in our slides. So I can sit here all day and talk about some of the science and the foundations that exist, but I feel we need to be able to back this up with some science that applies directly to our method of training. So we're going to take a little detour or deviate a little bit from what we were just talking about and go into some specifics about active motion training and some science that exists around it based on some studies that were done at the University of Michigan Human Performance Lab, so that you can see and understand that what I'm saying is valid, and that it really can add lots of value to what you do with your clients and help them in many ways. So at the end of last year, actually it was more towards the beginning of middle of 2014, U of M approached us, said that they were doing some studies. They have a lot of funding to support research around training fitness in seniors. So they wanted to take the active motion bars and plug them into a couple studies they were doing, and obviously we're not going to say no to that because we were trying to get some data around the benefits of our modality as well. So basically what they did was they did a bunch of studies measuring muscle activity in various groups of people. And just to cover real quick how that works is they use EMG technology or electromyography, which is basically these little sensors that you can see that they'll attach to the surface of the skin, and these little sensors can pick up electrical connectivity. So we know that muscles contract through electrical impulses that occur through fluxes of these sodium and potassium ions and action potentials. I won't get into all that, but this technology can pick that up and tell us the extent to which a muscle is firing, which is really cool. So we can have people do certain exercises with different tools and measure the amount of muscle activation that takes place. So that's exactly what they did. They, through using this EMG technology and inertial measurement units, or this technology measures body joint angle, they were able to kind of quantify how active motion bars affect the body as opposed to other tools. So the study that we're going to just look at here real briefly involves participants actually aging from 30 to 70 years of age. The typo here says 50, 30 to 70 years of age with the standard fitness equipment in a randomized series of exercises. And they just hooked people up to this EMG and IMU technology and measured the extent to which it affected their body. And it was really cool to see how dramatic the differences were. So here's a couple of graphs and charts showing that basically no matter what the muscle or muscle group that was tested, no matter what the exercise was, no matter who the person was engaged in the exercise, all the results were the same. Due to the shifting resistance, this variable resistance environment that we've created with the active motion bar, every participant experienced, significantly more muscle activation in all these areas, which is obviously what we wanted to see. So, and just to I'm sure some people are asking, was this biased? And we didn't. There's no compensation for the university involved. This is completely unbiased, done by researchers that I never spoke to. So, just to cover that. But so these are some of the results. You know, they saw actually increases over 300% in some cases, but the average was 20 to 40% more across all the areas, which is still very significant when you're talking about getting muscles to fire and challenging the body in these new dynamic ways. So to cover basically the reason why this all takes place is just the difference between a static mass and a moving mass. This slide outlines it, and it's all about biomechanics. You know, we've got on the left-hand side, we've got someone with a medicine ball. On the right-hand side, someone with an active motion bar. Even though this, you know, this exercise specifically, we wouldn't do a lot of in an active aging program, a lot of flexion type movements. This is just kind of to show the concept of biomechanics. You've got this green line that's cutting the body vertically to highlight center of mass, and then the red line indicating the length of the lever arm. And you can see that when using an active motion bar, the center of mass is going to shift more because of the fact that the resistance is displaced further away from the body, creating a longer lever arm. So what that does is it makes, you know, naturally, due to all these systems that we talked about, you know, the vestibular system is going to kick in and force the contraction on the opposite side of the body to bring the center of mass back to center. Okay? And this is just a concept that explains why there's more muscle activation taking place with an active motion bar due to the fact that the resistance is displaced further away from one center of mass. So,
yeah, I love lever arms, so I love talking about the biomechanical stuff. So yeah, I mean, you're right. You are getting a longer lever arm, but you know, part of the lever arm thing too is because the balls are rolling around, the lever arm shifts dynamically. You know, I mean, if you've got kind of that bar where the balls are centered, you know, as you lean over, then those balls shift over. So it not only becomes just a longer lever arm as if you had more weight on one end of the bar than the other, but it's a dynamic, you know, shift that occurs during the movement, which I think, you know, creates that proprioceptive stimulus as well, and that response.
Yep. Well, it's a good way to tie it in, Cody, definitely. And I try, you know, the biomechanics concept is something like in our training manual that we really do a deep dive into to develop a greater understanding of how the stimulus affects the body. But you just summed up some other parts of it really well right there. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. That's great.
All right. And some of the results, obviously I'm not going to read this all verbatim, but some of the results that came out of the study are listed right here too. And the goal for me in this, you know, isn't to sell people on this concept as much as it is just to educate. So I will provide all these slides to Cody, and Cody can send them to people, or I'll give you my contact information. You can ask me directly if you want to learn more about the results and the benefits specifically. You can read this later. But so that is basically a good rundown of the science and you know, the rationale for implementing active motion training into anyone's routine, regardless of the level of fitness. So now I plan on kind of covering our training system, more specifically going over some of the protocols, methods, exercises, and things like that. So real quick, as I mentioned, we have 6 different variations of our active motion bars. They range from 4.5 up to 18 pounds. If you read in our mission statement at the beginning of this, we start with one of the things we like to teach is doing more with less. So, you know, 18 pounds isn't a significant amount of weight. Now, for the types of people that we work with in this context, it can be, but just because of the fact that you're getting all that additional muscle activation, you don't need to be using as much resistance. So active motion bars range from 4.5 to 18 pounds. The 4.5 version is only 4 feet in length, while all the other ones are 5 feet. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit later too, but that's just to go over the products themselves. How we will train a client using active motion bars and active motion training is really simple. We have this 5-step cueing system. So no matter what, no matter if I was teaching someone in one-on-one training or a small group or even group fitness, covering these 5 points before every exercise will bring clarity and great instruction for the client to follow. So the first thing we'll focus on is where to grip the ActivMotion bar. So there are these white lines that are printed on the bar, each exactly 18 inches in from each end, to create symmetry when you're holding on to it. So the first thing you would do is, if you're using a bilateral or two-hand grip, is to instruct the client to hold the ActivMotion bar on or equally near those white lines. If we're using it in a single arm context, which honestly in training specifically for our seniors, it's not something we do a whole lot of, but I figure we'll cover it here anyways. That logo that you see printed on the bar is directly in the center, so that would be our reference as to where to grip it if we're holding the ActivMotion bar in one hand. After we cue the grip, we'd move to bar position. So Cody just referenced, the effects that takes place when you're trying to keep the ActivMotion bar parallel to the floor. The goal is to try to keep the weight centered and stable during the exercise. And you'll feel the weight shifting inside the bar, trying to keep it, maintain that center parallel position to the floor, and that's the goal. Now, it's important to note that during those exercises, the client will never be able to keep the bar perfectly still. The goal is to always have a little movement taking place. So there's going to be this constant action-reaction, taking place throughout the exercise, and that's what we want to happen, to keep the mind and body engaged. So I say that, and I think that's really important to clarify, because a lot of times I think our clients, if they can't do something that we ask them without providing a lot of instruction, they feel like they've failed. And so if someone can't get the weight to sit perfectly still inside the bar, they get frustrated and say, I can't do it. Well, as long as you preface the exercise by saying that weight is always going to be shifting, then it's clearly understood, and you'll overcome that gap or that area of difficulty with the client pretty quickly. So that's first bar position, keeping it parallel. Second is, if you look below the animated figure that's holding the bar parallel, is there's someone engaging in a lateral flexion exercise. Method of use number 2 is where we actually purposely tip the bar to one side to displace all the resistance off to that side. During these movements, and again, this isn't something that we do a whole lot of in our programming for active adults, but during these movements, the idea is to create some momentum and significantly displace the center of mass purposely to force like a reaction to take place, and that reaction is, the opposite side of the body activating to bring us back to center. So those are the 2 bar positions. So after instructing grip, instructing bar position, hey, we're going to keep it parallel, or we're going to purposely tip and tilt. The next cue kind of ties right into the number 2, which is physical feedback, and this is just explaining to the client what they should feel. You're either going to be feeling the weight staying centered as their stability is being challenged, or they're going to feel the weight shift to one side. Now, going along with this idea of creating a feel it, hear it, environment, we do cue audible feedback too. So during those movement patterns where we're trying to keep the weight stable, say we're just holding the bar at our chest and we're doing like a half range of motion reverse lunge, we want to cue the client to try to keep the bar quiet, right? And that's going to bring even more mindfulness to the exercise, as we're focusing not only on what they're feeling happen inside the bar, but what they're hearing. So that's where a lot of value can be realized in training the proprioceptive systems, by focusing on the audible feedback, okay? And the last cue is cueing the tempo and the rhythm, and this is just basically only applies to the multiplanar exercises where we're tipping and tilting the bar, creating a rhythm where the weight inside the bar is shifting at the same pace as the body is moving, just to create flow and symmetry. So that's our 5-step cueing system that we would use to teach any movement. This is all covered in our training manuals as well, and all the supporting education content when people decide that they want to start to integrate this into their clients' workouts.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, because if you do have a chance to get ActivMotion bar in your hand, the difference between kind of your steps of, all right, let's hold the bar parallel, let's keep those weighted balls kind of centered, and that's kind of your purpose as you go through your movements, versus purposeful displacement, of the bar, of those balls. And I mean, I really like both aspects, and especially as kind of a building tool, and getting up into those dynamic movement patterns where you're having to respond to those weight shifts. I mean, there's so much that you can do with it that enhances even what you can do from kind of a dumbbell, perspective. As an example, someone's like trying to shift hands with a dumbbell, during a movement to go from unilateral on one side to the other side. Basically you have that capability within a bar, for it to just shift back and forth. And so that's kind of one thing that I really like about it is kind of when you look at, our training model and trying to get to all those different systems that you've been talking about that all, tie into function. It's not just about strength. There's so many other systems that we need to train in, especially kind of the reactive component, So going from, you think about even those perturbations of, well, they can be, you can anticipate them, right? You can kind of have them planned, or they can be reactive, right? Where you really don't know. And you have both aspects of those that's kind of built into the bar, right? You can really tilt that bar a lot, and so you're anticipating kind of that weight shift, but at the same time, like especially if you're trying to hold it in one hand, like that one guy's doing, I mean, you don't know what's going to happen with that bar, and so it makes it very reactive. So I like, being able to address both aspects of that just with one tool. That just, to me, makes it much more efficient.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good segue into kind of what the next slide shows here is progressing from those smaller, more isolated exercises all the way up to those big dynamic movements. And that's exactly how, our training system is laid out. There's another slide that's going to show this after, or explain this in better detail after this slide, but I think it's important to kind of read through these and understand the three phases that exist within active motion training. So basically we call it's a D3 system, just to keep, just to have something to kind of catchy to remember by. So we have disrupt, discover, and define. These are the three systems. They're progressive in nature. So disrupt, the word that we can correlate that with is activation. I mentioned earlier that before we ask someone to try to do a dynamic movement or balance on one leg, we want to make sure that they've created a strong anchor in their core, in every plane of motion. So we'll focus first on creating that anchor through exercises where that are almost isometric in nature. Very little movement of the extremities occurring, instead contractions and co-contractions of all the muscles that help support, stabilize the spine and pelvis. That's what we're focusing on in this phase. Okay. Then we progress integration, where after we've taught the muscles to anchor the spine and pelvis, now we can start to mobilize the spine and the extremities and challenge the body a little bit more dynamically, but it's only after that we've created that stability strength. And after that, we progress to the reaction phase, where we would be engaging in those big multi-planar movements where we're tipping and tilting the bar, maybe moving with a little bit more velocity and momentum. So here's a couple cool little charts right out of our training manual that kind of highlight these three phases a little more effectively than if you were just to read those paragraphs. So disrupt, discover, define all across this continuum. You can see it's progressive, where we activate, then we integrate the extremities and spinal flexion and extension, and then we start to react by engaging in those big dynamic movements. And then on the little chart down here on the bottom, here's some other kind of keywords and body positions and things to help you understand each phase of training just a little bit more. So as I mentioned, in the disrupt phase, these movements are mostly done on the floor. There's some standing, but the main thing to remember here is all the movement patterns are almost isolated or isometric. They're very, not a whole lot of movement taking place. And then when we progress to discover, that's when we start to mobilize the spine and the extremities and doing things lying, kneeling, standing. And then define, you get easy to remember this one because it's only in this phase where we start to teach those big, lateral flexion, rotation exercises, adding momentum and velocity that are really going to displace the mass inside the bar off to one side and challenge the body more dynamically. So we can look at each phase now and some exercises that would fall into each phase and kind of explain, going back to the cueing, how we would differentiate these phases. But first, I don't know, Cody, I just didn't know if you had anything else to add right here, if you want to continue.
No, keep going. I think this is great. So just kind of keep going with where you are.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go into the disrupt phase first. So this is where we would start any client with active motion training. No one's unless there might be some people listening right now who have active motion bars. That's great. Chances are you don't. So we want to start every client in this disrupt phase, where before we ask them to do any real dynamic movements with the active motion bar, we want to get them used to this environment of a dynamic, shifting load. So we'll put them in positions that are functional in nature and ask them to maintain stability for a certain amount of time, just like you would have someone hold a plank, right, for a certain period of time. We're going to put the client into a position and ask them to hold it while maintaining stability inside the active motion bar. That's what this phase is all about. So we'll do things from the kneeling position. We'll do things from the staggered stance position, and we'll do things from, some things from the single leg balance as well. Again, during this phase, though, the goal is to try to keep the active motion bar in the center. Try to keep the weights in the center. Try to keep the bar quiet, and try to always kind of just be connecting the mind and the muscles to a little deeper extent as we're bringing in these other factors into the training environment, forcing the client to be more mindful of where their body is in space. Okay, so that's what that phase is all about. We will, and I don't have any of the images on here, but there are quite a few exercises in this phase that we'll do on the floor as well, that involve certain like bridge patterns and things like that, where you're trying to create core activation and stability strength through holding onto the bar during those exercises. Mm-hmm. So that is our first phase of training, is disrupt. And if we climb up to the continuum, say, all right, we've gotten our client now familiar with the active motion bar. They know how to coordinate movement in these simpler exercises correctly. Now let's start to integrate some movement here. Let's start to have them be more mobile during our exercises. Well, now we'll progress to discover, or integration. So just as a simple example, going from a static hold in like a half lunge position now to doing the full range of motion lunge is how we would progress that. We do a lot of things in this phase from the hinge position, where we're implementing the active motion bar into movement patterns now that are causing more movement in the extremities. So there's lots and lots of ways to progress and regress all of these exercises. Far too many for me to cover, in the short amount of time that we have. One progression/regression concept that I can cover very easily is going back to the idea of biomechanics. And during all these exercises, we create progressions by asking the client to either hold the bar out in front of them or overhead, increasing the length of the lever, thus imposing more demand and difficulty on the body. And if we want to regress any of these exercises, you would hold the bar either under the shoulders, as you see on the left-hand side, or at the chest, as you see in the top photo there. So those are, and that concept can be applied across the board too, no matter what tool you're working with, right? We all know that if we were to take like a medicine ball and hold it in closer to our chest and do a squat, it's a lot easier than if I were to take that same medicine ball, extend my arms out in front of my body, and then engage in the same exercise. Eventually, the shoulders are going to burn out, even though it might create some counterbalance. So that's the discover phase. So we have disrupt, activation, discover, integrate more movement of the extremities, and then we have define. And it's during these movements where we're purposely tipping and tilting the bar. In this figure here, you can see that the animation is the person is holding a C-shaped spine or abdominal flexion and rotating back and forth as that weight shifts to one side. It's going to eccentrically activate the obliques more as they move further into the rotation, causing those muscles to engage more and bring them back to center. So that's the whole concept behind the defined phase of training. And again, we don't go into, this is just us as a company and as an education platform personally, don't go into this type of movement pattern, these types of movement patterns as much with our active adults, because instead of focusing a lot on, flexion of the spine and lateral flexion, we focus more on the development of that stability strength. So we would actually spend a lot more time in the disrupt and discover phase.
Yeah. So how long do you spend in kind of disrupt phase? Is it like, okay, here's a couple introductory sessions, just to get familiar with it, or do you spend more like, we're going to spend several weeks for a new person in that phase?
Well, it's all really unique to the client and the level of fitness that they are currently at. One thing that can be done pretty easily, if the fitness professional is already working with clients in movements that are pretty static in nature, like bridges and things like that, kneeling, step through exercises. It's pretty easy just to plug in the ActivMotion bar, where maybe they were using a standard weighted bar or something like that was already taking place. If that's not the case, then yeah, we would follow the same progressive method as what's been taught by probably any certification that any one of us has. Is we're basically looking for clear comprehension and development of the skills necessary to stabilize the body before we move to the discover phase.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if based on what we're observing as a fitness professional is positive, and what the client is telling us in terms of the intensity of the exercise is positive, then we would progress on to the next phase. That's typically how how the progressive system is rolled out.
Okay.
So, now that kind of covers everything. There is one other method of use that we plug into the active motion training, and this actually doesn't involve holding onto the active motion bar at all. It's where we get down on the floor and engage in various plank positions where we're actually using the end caps and white lines on the bar as reference points to reach the hands and feet towards. Some of these movements can get really intense, like the one you see there in the bottom where we're holding a plank and reaching the foot for the end cap. But again, this is just in the name of developing core stability strength and bringing more mindfulness to the environment by giving the client a task to achieve, as opposed to just having them hold an isometric plank for a certain amount of time. So that's another way that we plug it in there. Not a massive component of our programming, but nonetheless, it is included in some of the education. So,
Okay.
Cody, I don't know if you have anything to add to that either.
Oh, no, not really. I mean, I like your progression model, and you definitely want to make sure that people statically can get the sensation of it. They kind of understand what's happening before they really just start throwing the thing around all over the place. And bringing in, like you said, that mindfulness of focusing in on what's happening, feeling the balls, hearing the balls move around, trying to keep them balanced before then you move into the dynamic movement pattern. So I like that.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and then going back to your question that you had, knowing how to progress, where to start, these are all things that we rely on our customers a little bit on, is because they your clients the best and what their level of fitness is, the program that they're currently engaged in now, what types of loads they're using, what movement patterns are in place. So when determining where to start with active motion training in terms of the level and the amount of resistance to use, again, we rely a lot on the fitness professional for that. Now we can tell you that there are clearly some most popular products that we have that typically people training seniors start with, and that's the 4.5, 6, and 8 pound options by far. Those are honestly probably 95% of ones that we would sell to people working with active adults. Again, and that just, it might not sound like a lot of weight to some people, but I think for those of us who've been training seniors for a long time and understanding the fact that this is not static weight, it's moving, this is going to be plenty of resistance and provide a very significant challenge for the person we're working with.
Yeah, and that's,
and just to,
I'll say that's
sorry,
that's kind of one of the big points too. I mean, it's the idea is if we would just want to max out with the strongest muscles that we can get, and that's our goal, then get on a machine and isolate your muscles and do those sorts of things. And the point of functional aging training is, look, there's a lot more to function than just strength. And so when you look at the resistance level, again, sometimes more is not better. Sometimes less is more. And I think especially having this dynamic variable of the resistance shifting around, now you're not looking at, okay, let's just maximize strength in this linear movement pattern, right? It's about the stability, and it's about the proprioceptive awareness and the sensory systems playing in. So it's a lot more that we're looking at than just that one isolated variable of strength. And so I mean, I agree that you don't need a super heavy weight that is really variable, because now you're looking at injury. Now you're looking at something that goes way beyond what our bodies can probably tolerate. So I like the fact, okay, let's do these movement patterns with a smaller, moderate amount of weight and kind of change what we're expecting to get out of the exercise.
yeah, and what you just said too about kind of stepping away from the old school strength or paradigm just a little bit, and because now the goal here isn't to develop a massive amount of strength and global muscles, right? What we're trying to do here is to create awareness, try to create stability, strength, and get to some of those areas in the body that typically are underactive, right? By using this variable resistance, we're able to challenge stability more, and so that's the whole idea. And in support of, to support people when they start to integrate our system is, no matter what products are purchased, we always include lots of education. So the training system DVD that you see on the left-hand side kind of breaks down everything that I talked about here, and also delivers some exercises with progressions and regressions to kind of get them started off. So that's kind of the offering there. There's a lot of other programs that we have and opportunities to integrate the ActivMotion Bars in different ways, but that's kind of how to start. So on the right-hand side here, we have some of our customers and partners, just because I think it's important to establish some credibility that way. But Cody, I can't remember what you said. Can we actually answer questions right now, or do we have to answer those later?
No, we can answer those now. People put them in their put it in the question bar and send them in. Then we can try to address them as they come in.
Okay, so we'll do that. Yeah, as they come in, I'll move on to the next slide here and go back to that if people have questions. But so here's some of the links to other things that we do here, some of our social media channels and our website. We do offer workshops in specific areas. I mentioned we work in a couple of different verticals. So some of our specialty modules are available down below, from obviously our active adult module, which is by far the most popular right now, all the way down to more mind-body type programs, golf fitness, which is actually another big one with this population. But yeah, that's some of the other education we offer as well. So.
Okay. Here's a question for you, and that is, what is the feedback that you get from the participants? Like when people first start using it, especially an older adult, what is the feedback that they're giving you about it?
Yeah, so there's two things, and one goes right back to the idea that less is more, is because the first thing we'll hear is, man, that 6 or 8 pound active motion bar feels a lot heavier than 6 or 8 pounds.
Yeah.
That's one of the first things we'll hear, honestly, is because it is so much more challenging and dynamic. Second is, man, I feel that working my body in areas that I haven't felt work in a long time. That is just genuinely, honestly, the next most common response that we get. And again, it's just because the way that mass is displaced on the body, there's going to be more muscle activity, as you observed in the U of M slides, that's taking place. So those are by far the most common responses. Yep.
Okay. And here's another question. Do you feel, or have you experienced certain people or certain conditions that might be aggravated by this type of training? Like, are there any kind of, things you need to watch out for with certain older clients?
I think, first of all, no, we've never run into any issues with anybody getting injured regardless of their age or level of fitness. And I think that's because of the fact that we've done a good job educating fitness professionals on how to use our products. So, if you're working with someone who is, pretty significantly limited in what they can do, in terms of their level of fitness or certain injuries or limitations they have, during a lot of exercises when we're showing regressions, we'll actually show the exercise without the active motion bar first.
Mm-hmm.
Because some of the movements will put more stress on the body than someone who's really deconditioned might be able to handle. So being conscious and aware of the fitness level and certain injuries or limitation that the client has is always very important. Obviously, that takes place through assessment and program design. So.
Okay, good. Well, that is all the questions we have time for now. As you can see from the screen, the Derek has been very generous in offering a 15% discount on any purchases to all you guys that are listening. So put that code FAI15. I guess there's a little discount code box when you check out. Is that right?
Yep, there is. Yep.
Okay. Well, that's great. And Derek, how could people get in touch with you directly if they have some more follow-up questions for you?
Yeah, well, there's a contact form on our website, or I didn't put my email address on here, I apologize, but it's just my first name, Derek, which is DEREK at ActivMotionBar.com. That's my email address. So people can feel free to ask questions. That way, actually, if you call that 888 number and I'm in the office, you might be able to get me that way too. So just ask for Derek. And I love talking to people and educating and sharing, what we're doing. So I'm more than happy to communicate through any of those channels.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Derek, for coming on and sharing about your new innovative product and some of the methodologies behind it. We really appreciate that, and that provides a lot of good value. For all you that are out there, it's just keep looking for tools that are going to be helpful for you in really getting to all those different areas of function that we talk about, at FAI, because that's really what's going to maximize your results. In fact, I got a comment here from Bonnie, who lives in Pennsylvania, and she says she wanted everybody to know that she uses the equipment and she's gotten great, capital letters, results with her seniors. So again, just kind of more social proof there, yeah, to show it. And again, that's the thing, is we wouldn't be on here with Derek kind of talking about this if we didn't believe there was something to this equipment and to the methodology, and if we didn't like Derek so much either. So so that's really important. So we appreciate that, Derek, and maybe we'll have you on again sometime later on, and maybe go into a little bit more detail about some of these methodologies. But guys, I just want to recommend you get on there, check out the website, check out the ActivMotion Bar, and really consider purchasing those with your clients. So we are going to check out. Appreciate everybody's attendance. This is Cody Sipe again, and just kind of stay up with us. We'll have more webinars coming out in the future. Thank you.
Thanks.